In the farthest corner of the room, like a statue frozen in its stillness, settled the cat. His condition was heavy. He felt morally crushed and deeply humiliated. Once he proudly considered himself the sole object of his people's love, unique and irreplaceable, but now he could barely comprehend what had happened. It all started just a few days ago. Near Matros's bowl, where solitude and order had always reigned, another small bowl suddenly appeared, tiny and modest. Where his scratching post once stood, an impressive play complex emerged, and a transparent bag full of new toys unexpectedly appeared on the corridor cabinet. These toys, as it turned out, Matros was not allowed to touch, which only heightened his anxiety. Matros began to feel uneasy. Losing his appetite, he stopped eating normally and started moving restlessly around the house, like a wandering shadow aimlessly moving from one corner to another. In the evening, when he heard his owners returning home, his heart filled with the usual excitement, and he rushed to the door as he always did. However, this time he was met with an unexpected surprise. The door opened, and a small kitten was carefully placed on the floor. The tiny creature, barely having arrived in the house, began to actively twitch its curious face, attentively exploring the new surroundings. For Matros, this moment was truly shocking. Matros froze, as if turned into a statue. His heart ached with unbearable pain, and remaining in the shadows, he cautiously retreated to the farthest corner of the room. From there, invisible to everyone, he continued to watch what was happening. The people who once loved him so much seemed to have completely forgotten his existence. With bitterness in his soul, Matros watched as their tender gazes were directed at the fluffy newcomer, just as they once looked at him. The entire evening, all the attention of the household was focused exclusively on this tiny furry bundle, while the adult, faithful cat sat aside, abandoned, and deprived of the warmth he had grown accustomed to over the years. Suddenly, Matros felt his head spinning. A black irritation like a dense fog enveloped his mind. Although he did not feel anger towards people, all his wrath and annoyance seemed to be magnetically drawn to the little kitten. This feeling grew, and eventually the cat could no longer hold back. When the kitten approached too closely, Matros suddenly sprang from his secluded hiding place. In an instant, he struck the kitten, knocking it off his paws and turning it onto its back. The loud cry of the owner pierced the air. She screamed in horror, shooing Matros away, and the owner, with a stone expression, picked up the cat and took him outside. Finding himself in the cold hallway, Matros was left alone, with pain and confusion about what would happen next. From the hallway, where he was indifferently placed, Matros continued to watch attentively. Like film reels in an old projector, memories flickered in his mind, and he vainly tried to find even the slightest comfort in them. The cat, with undisguised anticipation, caught his owner's glances, but they seemed not to notice him, passing by as if through an invisible shadow. Tired and depressed, Matros leaned against the massive front door, which suddenly creaked open under his weight. Taking advantage of this, he cautiously slipped outside and, without looking back, hurried away from the house that once seemed so familiar and dear to him. But going far away was beyond his ability. Reaching the cold, cracked brick wall, Matros stopped, exhausted. His body weakly slid down, and he settled on the cold ground, sinking into heavy thoughts. It began to seem to him that someone else had settled inside him, as if his own life suddenly became not his own. Everything seemed wrong, as if something important, so necessary, was left behind somewhere. As if he, with his thoughts and feelings, had been erased from his previous existence, leaving only emptiness and a sense of loss. The anger towards the little kitten seemed to have melted away without a trace, disappearing so suddenly that it seemed it had never existed. In its place remained only deep melancholy, intertwined with a sense of complete confusion. Why are they so indifferent? If people had immediately approached the little one, called it with a gentle voice, petted it with care, got to know it better, and then gave each of them a toy mouse, couldn't everything have turned out differently? But their behavior spoke otherwise, as if Matros was left forever in the past, as if he disappeared into a distant and already forgotten time. The cat, immersed in despair, lost the ability to notice what was happening around him. Just a few days ago, his tiny heart would skip with joy as he looked out the window at the frightening but simultaneously enticingly mysterious outside world. Now everything had changed. He found himself here, lonely and lost. The only thing that instilled real fear in him was the realization of losing his owners and their indifference. The desire to live left him, and the meaning of existence dissolved into icy emptiness. Now everything around seemed gray and faceless, and even the simplest joys that once filled his small world had disappeared. The cat no longer searched for familiar faces with his eyes, nor reached for the warmth that once seemed unshakable. He seemed to have plunged into eternal twilight, where memories of past happiness only intensified his loneliness. Next to him, a piece of pie infused with the aroma of fried liver fell onto the hard asphalt with a dull thud. The cat, watching attentively, followed the figure of the man disappearing into the twilight. This barely noticeable gesture of kindness, fleeting and seemingly completely ordinary, touched Matros deeply. Tears, unable to be held back, clouded his eyes. He, without strength, sank to the ground, pressing his face to the fallen pie and clutching it with his paws, as if it were the last thread connecting him to hope. "Don't you dare, not even the tiniest crumb," seemed to whisper his tormented soul. Twilight deepened. The street was gradually embraced by the black shroud of night, but the cat continued to lie there, not lifting his head from the pie. Slowly and carefully, he licked the filling, as if trying to prolong the moment. On his fur, where the tears had long dried, remained dull traces, resembling rain streaks spreading across the dusty window. Matros couldn't forgive himself for leaving his cozy refuge, but even more, his soul was torn apart by the bitter remorse for the outburst of anger he had unleashed on the defenseless kitten. The house left behind beckoned like a distant star, but the way back now seemed unattainable, like a fleeting vision in a scorching desert. The longing that had bound his heart made this path even more frightening and unreal. "Here you are, our owner is found," came a sudden voice, seemingly out of nowhere. The man, whose bare feet were clad in simple rubber slippers, bent down over Matros. But the cat, completely immersed in his thoughts, did not immediately realize what was happening. He still thought that the person he had been waiting for so long was just an illusion created by his exhausted mind. It was only when the warm, caring hands gently lifted his striped body from the icy asphalt that Matros realized it was not a figment of his imagination. He had been found. They still remembered him. The cat took a deep breath. He pressed himself trustingly against the hollow on the man's neck, feeling the warmth and protection he had so sorely missed. At that moment, a few dried crumbs of liver left on his whiskers silently fell onto the sidewalk. The next morning, these crumbs, like a precious breakfast, were picked up by the first awakened sparrows. Their sight reminded Matros of the past. Back then, still small, he sat on the windowsill and watched the birds with curiosity. They seemed to him like animated toys, so lively and amusing. Now, Matros knew, a home is not just a place where you are. A true home is those who wait for you. Those who love you despite everything, even when you have long been lost and perhaps completely alone. Friends, if you enjoyed this video and it left a pleasant impression, we would be happy to hear your thoughts on this situation in the comments section. Your feedback is very important to us. Please don't hesitate to express your thoughts and share your impressions. Moreover, we invite you to become part of our growing audience. Subscribe to our channel to always be at the epicenter of the most exciting and relevant events. Only with us will you not miss anything important and interesting. Thank you for being with us, and see you again in the near future. We await you again.